Around 40 miles east of Stranraer, on the Martyrs Peninsula, lies the town of Wigtown. Today it's known as Scotland's book town, thanks to its proliferation of second-hand bookshops and an annual book festival. Across a century of conflict during the 1600s, thousands of Presbyterian Covenanters died violently, very many at the hands of government forces. One of the most powerful and disturbing stories to emerge from that period is that of the Wigtown Martyrs. On this spot in 1685, an elderly woman named Margaret McLachlan and a teenager called Margaret Wilson were tied to stakes and drowned in what was then the tidal channel of the River Bladnoch for refusing to swear an oath to the king as head of the church. My mother's folk are all Wilsons, and I've always felt an emotional connection with the Wigtown Martyrs. I first visited here as a wean with my parents, and I've since brought my own children here too. In the Reformed faith, we don't really do pilgrimages, but Wigtown is as close to being hallowed ground as it gets.
Our graves are down here.
Donna Brewster is a local historian who spent years unearthing details about this tragedy. Well, can you tell me the specifics of what happened to Margaret McLachlan and Margaret Wilson? Were they given opportunities to recant, to take the oath?
They deliberately tied Margaret McLachlan further down inside the riverbank. You'll see the depth of the riverbank there. A stake halfway down, they tied the older woman lower down so that she would drown first. It seemed to be an intention to save the younger life by frightening her into recanting. They were right by each other at the same stake. It was one stake. So young Margaret Wilson had to watch this woman die. And they thought she would recant, but she refused to recant. And the people were pleading. They said, God save the king. Just say, God save the king. And she said, God save him if he will. And they said, she said it. But it was not enough because she didn't do a full recantation. And she said, let me go. I am one of Christ. Let me go. Yeah. And she was then allowed to go under the water.
That some people think it was a one-off, but it took place within a whole period of persecution.
I always tell people that this went on for 50 years. It was a sort of 2-3 generational nightmare for the people of the time. And the story of the two Margarets is sort of like features into it. If you're thinking of the Holocaust and all the numbers of people and the types of people that were put to death in huge numbers. But there's Anne Frank. The two martyrs are that sort of figure in the story that encompasses many, many lives, many, many names in the whole area. The hills here are full of memorials and descendants of people from that come from those times who remember the story too. But the two Margarets were different because it was a young woman and an old woman, and their descendants are still here.
On our side of the water, there's a lot of people who don't know that Presbyterians were persecuted for 2 or 3 generations here.
Yes, it wasn't just Presbyterians, though. The Catholic people were in hiding here, too. It was all people who did not submit to the king's authority over the church were sought out and put to death. The story of the two Margarets has strong links with Northern Ireland and beyond. Margaret Wilson had brothers who went to Ireland.
Yes.
Her brother Thomas, who was listed in the 1684 parish list along with her as being fugitives, he managed to get to Northern Ireland. He came back, but there are more Wilsons that stayed there, and there's evidence within Northern Ireland of their complaints at the time registered in Northern Ireland at the treatment of their sister.
This story became so famous that it reached Holland, where a young Dutch nobleman wrote a letter in which he described women being drowned without respect of age or sex and not being permitted to pray and so on. And that Dutch nobleman was the Prince of Orange, who of course later becomes William of Orange. And another of our traditions is that Margaret's brother Thomas was at Carrickfergus when William of Orange arrived.
There's another brother also who claims to have been there at that time and was given land by William of Orange.
I also read a tradition that one of the soldiers who was tasked with ensuring they were drowned, when the water got to a certain level, he mocked Margaret Wilson in SCOTS and said, "Tak another drink, hinny," just as the water was reaching her mouth.
And became diabetic after and had a thirst that could never be quenched. That was the local story.
Have you met people in the present day whose ancestry goes back to this story?
Yes, I live in a street in Wigtown where I have a descendant of Margaret Wilson's family on one side of me, 3 doors up, and a descendant of Margaret McLaughlin's family a few doors down. But there are more in the countryside around. I know the people who live on the farms where the two martyrs lived and have met many people connected with this story from all over.